Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that honestly feels almost surreal to even discuss seriously. Is Nigel Farage actually potentially the next Prime Minister of the UK?
It's a question that just completely upends decades of assumptions about British politics, doesn't it? I mean, think back 6 months. Anyone saying this, they'd have been laughed out of the conversation.
Completely. But the reason we have to take it seriously now, the trigger for this whole deep dive, it comes down to the data. Specifically, that YouGov MRP poll.
Exactly. And it's crucial we understand why this poll matters so much more than, say, a standard opinion poll, MRP, that's multi-level regression and post-stratification.
Right.
It's not just asking a few thousand people who they'd vote for nationally. It digs much deeper. It models voter intentions constituency by constituency using demographics, past voting, local factors.
It's the gold standard for predicting actual seats won, not just vote share.
Precisely. And that gold standard model, well, it spat out a projection giving Reform UK potentially 311 seats.
311, which is what, just 15 seats short of an outright majority?
It's just 15, short. So you see a number like that from an MRP poll, and suddenly you're not talking about a pressure group or a protest party anymore.
No, you're forced to analyze them as a viable potential government. It changes everything.
And the historical context here is just wild. This is Nigel Farage we're talking about.
The same guy who tried, what was it, 8 times?
8 separate attempts to get elected as a member of parliament for Westminster and failed every single time.
So he spent his political career essentially outside the main UK parliament, operating from the European Parliament, the very institution he wanted Britain to leave.
It's quite the paradox. And talk about persistence.
You have to give him that. 8 attempts. And now potentially going from 0 Westminster seats ever held personally to number 10 in, 18 months or so?
It speaks volumes about his focus, his sheer relentless drive.
Love him or hate him, you just can't deny his impact. He's fundamentally shifted the political landscape twice now. First with Brexit, and now with this reform surge. So ignoring him, dismissing him, that's not just bad analysis anymore.
No, it's bordering on willful ignorance, given the numbers we're seeing.
Okay, let's dig into that surge then. Section 1. The electoral shift and this political vacuum he seems to have stepped into.
Right, the scale of the shift first, because the idea that this is still some kind of fringe movement just doesn't hold water anymore.
Yeah.
Our research shows Reform UK jumping from around 14% in the polls early this year.
Which was already quite high for a smaller party.
Exactly. To now consistently polling at or near 30% nationally, sometimes even higher in specific polls.
That's a massive jump, 16 points or more in less than a year. That's not just noise.
Absolutely not. It signals a genuine, broad-based movement. It's pulling voters primarily from the Conservatives, yes, but it's also attracting disillusioned voters from other areas, too. It's not just ex-Tories.
And geographically, it's fascinating. This isn't the old UKIP map, is it? Concentrated in certain southern areas.
Not at all. The projections show Reform potentially dominating in completely different regions. We're talking the Northeast, parts of Wales, the East Midlands.
So areas that were traditionally Labour then flipped Conservative in 2019, the red wall seats.
Precisely those areas.
Yeah.
Which tells you this isn't just a regional phenomenon anymore. He's tapped into something national.
A sort of widespread disillusionment?
I think so. A feeling that cuts across old party lines, across different local concerns.
Yeah.
He just seems to have this uncanny knack for sensing where the political energy, the anger, is strongest and positioning himself right there.
But hang on, let me push back a bit. How much of this is really support for Farage and Reform's ideas versus just sheer frustration with the alternatives? Is he just benefiting from a vacuum?
Oh, the vacuum is absolutely critical. You wouldn't see this surge without the state of the main parties. The Conservative Party is, well,
in absolute disarray seems to be the consensus phrase. Some polls projecting them down to, 45 seats? Utter collapse.
It's unprecedented for a governing party. So yes, their implosion creates a huge space. But it's not just that. Labour hasn't sealed the deal either. Their sort of honeymoon period after the last election seemed to evaporate quite quickly for a lot of voters.
So people looked at Labour and felt, not inspired.
Or perhaps felt that Labour wasn't really offering a distinct enough alternative on the core issues driving this dissatisfaction. Immigration, the economy, that sense of national identity.
Right. So you've got one major party collapsing, the other failing to capture the public's imagination fully, and then Farage strides into that gap.
With a message that is, above all, clear, radical, yes, but simple, easy to grasp.
Stop the boats. Freeze immigration. Very direct.
Incredibly direct. And that brings us back to the irony, doesn't it? The establishment, the media, they dismissed him for decades, a sort of sideshow figure.
Yeah, a fringe figure, colorful maybe, but not a serious contender for power, confined to the European Parliament.
And now, that same figure is knocking on the door of number 10. It's a lesson, really, in how sustained opposition, if it taps into genuine public anger, can eventually just shatter the old order.
He didn't just capitalize on the mess the main parties were in, though. He capitalized on their failure, even after Brexit, to really address the issues he'd been banging on about for years.
Sovereignty, immigration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That gave him the platform to say, effectively, see, I told you they wouldn't fix it. You need me.
It gave him credibility with a certain segment of the electorate that felt ignored or betrayed.
Okay, let's pivot from the how of the surge to the who, the man himself. Because this isn't just about polls and policies, is it? It's so much about the Farage persona.
Fundamentally, you read any analysis, any source, and the words that come up again and again are natural communicator, charisma.
Yeah, a kind of raw, unfiltered connection that most politicians, frankly, just can't replicate. They seem too polished, too managed.
He manages to connect with groups you'd think would be completely turned off. I mean, the TikTok numbers are just astonishing.
Right. He's 60 years old, former city trader.
And he has 1.2 million followers on TikTok. That's not just luck. That's understanding the medium, understanding how to deliver his message, which is pretty traditional nationalist stuff in a way that resonates across different platforms and age groups.
It's a kind of political skill, you have to admit, regardless of the message itself.
Oh, definitely. But that charisma, that connection, leads us straight into the central Farage paradox.
Yeah.
The controversies.
Ah, yes. The endless stream. Allegations of racism, that Channel 4 documentary showing chaos inside the party, various comments over the years.
Scandals that would likely sink any other mainstream politician. Yet for Farage, they just don't seem to stick, do they? He seems Teflon-coated. Why?
This is maybe the most crucial thing to understand about his appeal for you listening.
Yeah.
The reason they don't stick is because his supporters have been sort of trained to interpret these attacks differently.
How so?
They don't see a controversy as proof of his flaws. They see it as proof that the establishment, the media, the political class is terrified of him and trying to unfairly take him down.
So every attack actually reinforces his image as the outsider fighting the system.
Precisely. It validates his core narrative. The more mud gets thrown, the more his base rallies around him, convinced he's being targeted because he speaks uncomfortable truths.
It's quite a feedback loop.
And the level of detachment from traditional political norms must be profound. Our sources mention some really pretty appalling remarks attributed to him over the years. Things like suggesting migrants could be used for target practice.
Truly shocking comments.
Yet, when these things are reported, widely discussed, his poll numbers often don't fall. Sometimes they even rise.
Which suggests his supporters either don't believe the reports, don't care, or perhaps they prioritize the disruption he represents over any concerns about his rhetoric or character.
It points to a very deep disillusionment with politics, as usual.
And that feeds into this whole everyman persona he's cultivated so successfully.
Which is another paradox when you look at his background.
Right. Educated at Dulwich College, that's one of the UK's most elite private schools.
Father a stockbroker. He worked as a commodity trader in the city of London for years. Not exactly a working-class hero background.
Not at all. But the image he projects, it's the pint of beer, the cigarette, the man in the pub speaking common sense, standing up for the little guy against the elites.
And his real genius, maybe, is making that performance feel completely authentic. He manages to frame what critics call, casual racism or extreme nationalism as just plain speaking stuff the woke metropolitan elite are too afraid to say.
It's political theater, absolutely. But incredibly effective theater.
Yeah.
He makes a privileged insider somehow seem like the ultimate relatable outsider.
And when he attacks the Oxbridge elite or the Westminster bubble, his own elite schooling magically becomes irrelevant to his supporters. Why? Because his anger feels real to them, unlike the polished sound bites of many career politicians.
So what actually drives him? After all these years, all these campaigns, is it pure ideology or is it something else?
It seems like a mix, doesn't it? There's undoubtedly a core ideological conviction there. a deep-seated nationalism, the anti-immigration stance. He's held those views consistently for decades.
But there's also something else.
You get the sense there's also maybe an addiction to the attention, the drama, the thrill of being at the center of the political storm. He seems to thrive on the controversy.
That combination could explain his relentlessness, couldn't it? The ideological belief provides the fuel, and the love of the spotlight ensures he never really steps away for long.
Okay, so if this persona, this movement, potentially puts him in power, what would a Farage government actually do? Let's look at the reform policy platform, and it is radical.
It really is. These aren't small tweaks around the edges. We're talking fundamental shifts. Let's start with immigration and sovereignty, his signature issues.
The big headline promise is stop the boats and the timescale.
Within 2 weeks of taking office, which is ambitious, to say the least, from a practical standpoint.
A very potent soundbite, though. What else on immigration?
A pledge to freeze all non-essential immigration entirely. For how long or how essential is defined isn't always clear, but the intent is drastic reduction.
And legally, the big one.
Leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR.
Okay, unpack that for listeners. Why is leaving the ECHR such a big deal?
Because it underpins a lot of UK human rights law and interacts with international law, especially around things like asylum claims and deportations. Pulling out would fundamentally change the UK's legal framework, give Parliament more power over courts in these areas, but also put the UK at odds with almost all other European countries.
A major legal and diplomatic shift, then. And coupled with that,
abandoning the UK's net zero climate targets. The argument being they're too expensive and economically damaging.
Okay, so radical on immigration, radical on human rights frameworks, radical on climate policy. What about the economy?
The economics. This is where it gets really eye-catching and potentially problematic.
Populist economics, is that fair?
That's exactly the term being used. The promises are huge. Raising the income tax threshold, the point at which you start paying income tax, to £20,000.
Wow. That's a massive tax cut for millions of people.
Enormous. Then add cutting corporation tax significantly and abolishing inheritance tax for estates under £2 million.
So big tax cuts across the board, benefiting low earners, businesses, and wealthier estates. Sounds appealing, but how do you pay for it?
Well, that's the multi-billion-pound question, isn't it? This is where it runs straight into fiscal reality. These are vast unfunded commitments.
Meaning they haven't identified specific spending cuts or other revenue streams to cover the cost?
Largely, no. Not in a way that satisfies independent economic bodies like the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS. They and others have already flagged enormous funding gaps.
So you can't have these huge tax cuts and maintain public services, let alone increase spending in areas like defense or border control, which reform also proposes.
Not without massive borrowing or incredibly deep cuts to other public services, or both. It creates an immediate risk of instability.
And that smell of instability, it inevitably brings up comparisons, doesn't it?
The Liz Truss comparison is unavoidable. Her short time as PM was derailed precisely because the markets reacted badly to unfunded tax cuts, and her proposed cuts were actually smaller than some of what reform is suggesting.
Right. The bond markets took fright. The cost of government borrowing soared.
Exactly. And international investors, the people who buy UK government debt, they will be watching this like hawks. They don't care about populist promises. They care about whether the sums add up.
If they think a government is being fiscally irresponsible, they demand higher interest rates on loans to that government. The gilt yields rise.
Which pushes up borrowing costs for the government, and often for mortgages and businesses too. So the very policies designed to boost the economy could perversely trigger economic turmoil if the markets don't believe they're funded.
It's a promise of disruption, but that disruption might hit people's wallets very directly.
It's a major gamble. Which leads us neatly to the next big question. Even if he got the votes, could Farage actually govern?
Section 4, the governing challenge. Transitioning from lifelong opposition figure to being the establishment.
It's maybe the biggest hurdle. His entire career, his entire skill set is built on campaigning, criticizing, disrupting. Governing is different. It needs consensus building, careful management, stability, almost the opposite skill set.
And his track record with organizations isn't exactly stellar, is it?
Well, UKIP was famously chaotic internally. Constant infighting, leadership challenges. It often seemed more like a vehicle for him than a structured party.
And the Brexit Party.
That was explicitly set up as a temporary campaign machine for the European elections and then the general election push. not designed for long-term governance.
Now, Reform UK has tried to professionalize a bit more, hasn't it? Setting up a limited company structure, appointing people for vetting candidates.
Yes, there have been moves in that direction. But there's still a massive gap between running a campaign, even a professionalized one, and running, say, the Treasury or the Home Office. Does he have the experienced team, the administrators, ready to step into those complex roles?
Probably not a deep bench, no. And then there's the inevitable clash with Whitehall.
Oh, guaranteed. His whole platform involves taking on what his supporters see as the deep state, the established civil service, the judiciary, the Bank of England even.
But you need the civil service to actually implement any policies. You can't govern without them.
Exactly. So you're looking at almost certain conflict from day one. Friction, delays, maybe even paralysis as his radical agenda meets the institutional inertia or outright resistance of the Whitehall machine.
Okay, so internal party readiness is a question mark. The civil service relationship looks fraught. What about Parliament itself? He likely won't have a majority, even on those best projections.
Almost certainly not. 311 seats still leaves him short. He'd need a coalition partner.
And realistically, given the numbers, that partner has to be
The Conservatives, or what's left of them.
right. And that negotiation, wow, talk about bad blood.
Decades of it. You have figures in both camps who have spent years trading insults. Remember David Cameron's fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists
Yeah.
comment about UKIP?
Vividly. How do you build a stable government out of that kind of animosity, especially when there are still deep policy disagreements, say on the exact immigration targets or how liberal the economy should be?
It would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
What compromises would Farage have to make? Would he give key cabinet posts like Chancellor to a Tory? Would the Tories demand he soften his stance on the ECHR?
It feels like a recipe for a very fragile, potentially short-lived government built on mutual suspicion rather than trust.
Absolutely. And then there's the question of Farage himself, his personal commitment to the long, hard slog of governing.
Because he has a history of stepping back, doesn't he?
He does. He resigned as UKIP leader multiple times. He famously declared job done and stepped back after the Brexit vote was won.
Is he really prepared for the relentless 247 grind of being prime minister? The detailed briefings, the international summits, managing crises day in, day out, potentially all the way to 2029?
It's a valid question. Delivering fiery speeches to cheering crowds, that's his forte.
No question.
Sitting in endless cabinet committee meetings on, say, social care funding reform or negotiating complex trade deals line by line. That requires a different kind of endurance. A different kind of focus.
It's the difference between political theater and the actual, often tedious business of running a country. Has he shown the appetite for the latter?
Historically, not so much. He's always seemed more drawn to the campaign, the disruption, the big moment, rather than the long-term administrative follow-through.
Okay, so huge governing challenges. What about the view from outside the UK? Section 5. International repercussions and those electoral variables.
If Farage becomes PM, the international impact would be instant. You'd see a pretty dramatic realignment of Britain's place in the world.
Moving away from traditional European partners.
Almost certainly. Less focus on Brussels, Paris, Berlin, and a much closer alignment with
Trump's America, assuming Trump is also in power, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That Farage-Trump connection goes way back. Remember that photo in Trump Tower right after the 2016 election?
The gold elevator picture. Iconic in its way.
It signals a move towards a more transactional, maybe more isolationist foreign policy, mirroring Trump's America First approach.
But does that lead to isolation? If the UK leaves the ECHR, ditches climate goals, does that push traditional allies away, even if Trump is friendly?
It very likely could. NATO partners, other European nations, they value those frameworks.
Yeah.
Pulling out puts the UK on a different path.
Yeah.
Even a close relationship with a Trump White House might not be smooth sailing.
Right. We saw Keir Starmer recently pushing back hard against Trump's comments about London and Sharia law, calling them nonsense. Any UK prime minister has to defend the country's interests and reputation.
Regardless of political alignment. So it's not necessarily an easy ride, even with a friendly face in the White House.
And circling back quickly to the economy, the international market reaction, we touched on the trust comparison.
It bears repeating. The risk of market volatility is real and significant if those unfunded tax cut promises are pursued aggressively. Bond markets aren't political, they're mathematical.
They want stability, predictability, sound finances. Populist rhetoric doesn't pay the bills.
Precisely. If they perceive fiscal recklessness, they will react. And that reaction could destabilize the UK economy very quickly. It's a major vulnerability in the reform platform.
Okay, but before we get to a Farage government, there's still an election. And there's a big X factor: tactical voting.
Huge. This is where the UK's electoral system gets interesting. First past the post.
Meaning you don't need 50% of the vote to win a seat, just more votes than any other single candidate.
Right. And analysis from groups like Electoral Calculus suggests that even if reform gets, say, 30% of the national vote, they could still be denied a majority or even the status of largest party if voters behave tactically.
So if Labour supporters, Lib Dem supporters, maybe even some anti-Farage conservatives all vote for whichever candidate has the best chance of beating reform in their specific local constituency,
it could dramatically reduce the number of seats reform actually wins, even with a high national vote share. Opposition unity at the local level could be a major barrier for Farage.
It's a critical variable, and it highlights the mandate issue too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Even if reform scrapes a majority or becomes the largest party, the fact remains that maybe 70% of the public voted for other parties.
So a Farage government would start day one facing incredibly vocal and organized opposition, representing a clear majority of the electorate.
In Parliament, potentially in the courts, if they pursue things like leaving the ECHR, and almost certainly on the streets, it would be governing against the grain of majority public opinion from the outset.
A hugely challenging prospect. Okay, let's try and pull this all together in our final thoughts.
So we've looked at the astonishing poll data, the Farage persona, the radical policies, the immense governing challenges, the international risks, the electoral maths. Where does it leave us?
We come back to that initial, almost unbelievable question. Are we genuinely looking at Prime Minister Farage? Or is this a spectacular but ultimately fleeting protest movement that's maybe just peaked at the right chaotic moment?
Based purely on the MRP electoral projections, the possibility of him forming a government is technically very real. 311 seats is within touching distance. You can't ignore that, maths. But then you layer on all the other factors, the questions about his party's organizational readiness, the guaranteed clash with Whitehall, the extreme difficulty of forming a stable coalition, the enormous risks in his economic plan, and his own track record regarding the sheer grind of governing.
The electoral math might say, yes, it's possible, but the practicalities of stable governance scream, maybe not, or at least highly unstable if it happens.
And perhaps the biggest lesson from the past decade or so of British politics, Brexit, Johnson's rise, the Truss implosion, is simply expect the unexpected. Dramatic political shocks seem to be the new normal.
Farage becoming PM would just be the next chapter in that story, wouldn't it? Perhaps the most dramatic chapter yet. So, the final thought we want to leave you, the listener, with goes beyond just liking or disliking Farage. It's a deeper question about what this potential reality says about the country. Is the rise of someone like Farage, who thrives on spectacle, promises disruption, and undoubtedly makes politics more exciting, more like a drama, is that a sign that maybe the UK is starting to prioritize political theater over the, frankly, sometimes dull but necessary business of effective, stable governance?
Are we perhaps becoming addicted to the political roller coaster, enjoying the show even as the potential consequences mount? It's something to seriously consider.
Because one thing seems certain: ignoring Nigel Farage, hoping he'll just go away. That strategy has failed the political establishment time and time again. Serious engagement with this possibility is now absolutely essential.
Whatever your politics, the phenomenon is real and the potential consequences are profound.
And on that note, we conclude this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep thinking.